we're going to talk about market research, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions to help guide our conversation a little bit. But first, I thought I would say hello and introduce myself briefly. Again, my name is Sarah Kynard, not Kennard and not Kennard, but go ahead, whatever you want. I own the Flamingo Project. We are a marketing consultancy for the AEC market, specifically focused on helping firms grow, which is why market research is definitely something that I love and do a lot of. I spent my career before starting the Flamingo Project at architecture firms and interior architecture firms, but now I do work, of course, with all AEC firms. So, and I did work regionally, globally, you name it. I've researched a lot of places and tried Google Translate on many documents to try and understand what's going on in markets. So I thought we would take a second and, oh, you know what? I think I only shared the PowerPoint, but that's okay. We went through, everybody said hello and kind of who they were with, but I thought we would answer a couple of questions so I can understand sort of what you guys are looking for in terms of this presentation and market research tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff. So since I did this incorrectly, if you can grab your phones for me. Here we go. This is what I
love it when presenters tell you to get out your phone.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because we already do have our phone out.
You do. Okay, so I just downloaded this app, which I don't recommend. This is not a presentation tips and tricks, by the way. Don't recommend downloading something when you need to use it. Well, it's not working. Of course it's not. Well, okay, so I'll just ask the questions. For most of you, and I'll look at the raise hand here, raise your hand if market research is your kryptonite.
It's not a webinar, so I'm not sure if we can raise our hands, but if everybody can activate the chat window, that would be a good way to do it. So at the very bottom where you have the option to mute yourself, if you just click the chat bubble, then we can do it that way.
Oh, cool. I can see. Okay, so if market research is your kryptonite and it's one of the things that you just absolutely hate doing, go ahead and let us know. Yes, market research is my kryptonite. Okay. Is there anybody on this call who loves market research and they think it's their genius work, type genius?
Think I'm not?
No. Okay, well, good. Then my hope here is to kind of demystify and give you some tools based on what you're looking for with your market research. So I'll go back to this, yep, and talk about sort of what, typically speaking, when people say, hey, Sarah, we need market research, or when I've been in firms, these are usually the purposes, okay? They want BD intel and it's totally pursuit driven. They're looking at new.
Sarah's screen, I don't see your screen. Did you click it all the way through?
You know, maybe not. There we
go. I can see.
Okay. So typically, you know, BD intel, pursuit driven, right? Firms are wanting to grow into a new market sector. Maybe they've hired somebody, right, that's got a portfolio and they want to grow into that particular sector. Maybe it's geographical growth or new services, or they really want to look at market disruptors and have a great conversation in their strategic planning about how they want to potentially tackle market disruptors. I hear that a lot from engineering firms that do surveying and mapping. I hear that a lot from construction firms because of all of the labor shortages that we have in construction and how that's, of course, driving technologies and things like that. So these are typically the purposes that most people reach out to me about for research, or that I've done when I was inside firms. Is there anything on here that you guys have a purpose for that's not listed that we can make sure to cover?
Do you ever do any like industry analysis as far as benchmarking where firms are in relation to the market? So I just want to know, do I have 10% of the DFW market in education, or do I have 90%? Like, where am I at in that spectrum?
Yes, we do. What I would say about that is it tends to be tricky when people want a true percentage. Unless it's a public market, it is hard to get a true read on the market, because there's a lot of data sources, and we're actually going to talk about that quite a bit. So unless it's public information, we have to make a bunch of assumptions when we do that. And usually the goal there, right, is to determine, is there room in this sector, or do we need to be looking at another sector if we want to grow? That's usually the purpose, right? And so what I would say is, most of the time when people ask me that, we really just do an analysis of who their clients are in that market, and if there are other clients. And then we also look at kind of their volume of work with those clients over time, as well as what the market says. So we usually do it very focused on clients when people ask that question, because it's usually driven by, they think their competitors getting more of the market, or they think that they're saturated. So that's usually a very custom process.
Yeah, thank you.
Whitney, I see your question about funding sources, federal, state, et cetera. Yes, absolutely. Usually that is, when people want to know more about a market or are updating their BD, right? So thank you. That's good. Okay, so I thought I'd kind of break down these different purposes and the different types of research and tools and all of that we would do. So I've got them kind of broken out. So BD, intel, and pursuit driven. Again, this is usually there is a pursuit. We're wanting to put together a strategic pursuit plan. So hopefully we've done client surveys in the past, and so we've got some data from those client surveys. Obviously, when a RFQ hits the street, it's not the time to do the client survey to try to capture that job. Hopefully we've done the work ahead of time. Of course, in-person meetings to gather information. That could be with your end client, that could be with your partners, and then competitive analysis, obviously, because you want to win. For new market sector growth, the types of research that we do is market size, disruptors. We look at persona development, strategic partner identification, end client identification, and competitive analysis. So one of the areas that I find regularly that firms don't look at when they're looking at new market sector growth is really identifying the strategic partners that they have that can help them get into that market, as well as doing that persona development. They say, oh, I want to go into hospitality as an example. And if you're an interior architecture firm and you want to do hospitality and you want to do it with the big flags, you have to get approved with the big flags. That's a big, kind of barrier to entry. They think, oh, well, we'll just sub to a architecture firm, or we'll be able to get the RFP because we know a few developers. But until they understand really who the personas are that are involved in the decision making, they don't really understand the barriers to entry, right? So those are usually the two areas where I think firms kind of underutilize their time and resources to help them identify whether or not that's a good market for them to pursue. Geographical growth is similar, but it's really important to look at the general development climate, right? So is this a particular, like I'm doing a market research project today in Denver. And, you know, there's a lot of information out there, of course, about the general development climate, as well as what's going on in disruptors in the market. Well, if I am researching for, say, a civil engineering firm versus an architecture firm, you know, the agriculture boom is a big deal to the civil engineering firm, but it's not for the architecture firm. Does that make sense? And then, of course, you want strategic partner identification if you're trying to grow geographically, and client identification and competitive analysis. And we're going to dive into these a little bit more. For new services, client surveys are your best tool and your best research for identification of potential new services, because they're already your clients and they have needs. We look at market size for those services and any disruptors again. The persona development, sometimes firms, I've seen it a bunch of times where it's an architecture firm, they brought in structural engineering in the past really successfully, and then they decide they're going to bring in MEP engineering. Well, their end client for MEP engineering is different than it is for structural and architectural, which is fine, but sometimes they don't understand that because they don't take the time to do that persona development. Of course, you want strategic partners, end client, and competitive analysis. Market disruptors. This is something that I got off a phone call just earlier today. We want to understand these market disruptors. Thought leadership is where you get it, and thought leadership from a lot of different places. I call it sort of the liberal arts research project, where you bring together lots and lots of different ideas to for discussion, really, with your leadership and your project managers and the people in the field, because you've got to really determine how that's going to affect your market. Very, very infrequently are there publications that just, outside of talking about technology and construction right now, that really, really address our market. So it's really fun. It's really fun to read all of that and come to some conclusions for opportunities. Okay, so I thought I would kind of dive into what some of these looked like in terms of these types of, so client surveys. We all know what client surveys are, you know, client or employee surveys. So I'm not going to belabor, but I thought it'd be really important to talk on some of these about how you do it and who should lead it, and who should be involved as well, of course. So obviously, when you're doing client surveys to get information about where, you know, what conferences they go to, or projects that are coming up, or what matters to them, you want to look, of course, at previous clients, current clients, and aspirational clients. You know, if you're, as a company, saying, we really want to grow this market, and the way that we feel like we can do that is to move into a different tier of client, or a different tier of project within that kind of commercial development. Who are those aspirational clients? And will they be open to an interview as well? I like to say that you kind of use all three modes whenever you do client surveys, because it really just depends on who you're talking to. Your current clients, you can usually get on the phone pretty easily. Your previous clients, they may or may not want to talk on the phone, but are willing to do an online survey. And there's also the time for in-person. Very frequently, I recommend for the aspirational clients, those to do in person, and somebody from the marketing team reaches out to them and says, hey, we're doing some research for our organization. Would you be willing to be interviewed? Sometimes they'd prefer to do phone, but they like the idea of being an expert, right? The reason why I say marketing is usually a good you know, team or person to really lead that effort is, obviously we're thinking really hard about what we're trying to answer with this kind of client survey, what data we're trying to get out. And sometimes when, especially with previous clients, when a project manager reaches out, they may or may not tell the whole story. They may not give you the information that you're needing because they have a previous relationship with that individual, and they either don't want to hurt their feelings or aren't entirely truthful. Seems malicious, but they aren't truthful. That's also why a lot of firms outsource client surveys, because they'll tell me all kinds of things they won't tell you. But I've very successfully done these when I was in-house as well. In-person meetings, of course, this is when we're talking about getting that BD intel for pursuit, right? And the best information, of course, for that sort of stuff is in-person meetings, because you're developing a relationship as well as getting information. That's, of course, something that either your business developers or your principals, if you have seller doers, are doing. Okay, so everybody knows about these. Competitive analysis. So where do I like to look for competitive analysis or information for competitive analysis? Obviously, business journal announcements, social channels, their website. I talk to my strategic partners. I think that's one that's really underutilized in competitive analysis and validation of what you find as well. I leverage my partners and previous partners quite a bit whenever I'm doing that. You know, does this sound right to you? This feels right from either our experience or the data that I found. But you know, you work with lots of firms, so what do you think? And of course, the purpose of doing that is in all of those different potential categories. Did somebody have a question or want to say something?
I think we've got some background music or background. I'm trying to mute it. Okay. There we go. Oh, I bet I muted Sarah now. Hold on. Sarah, are you back?
I'm back.
Okay, there you go. I muted the wrong number. I've got the background noise muted now.
Perfect. So one of the other things that I think is really important is for both marketing and whoever is on the front lines to do the competitive analysis. The reason I say that is just like with the strategic partners, the BD and the principals can sometimes be biased, or we can be biased, and we help cancel some of that bias out. And what I mean by that is maybe somebody previously worked at a firm 10 years ago and says, oh, no, I know all about this firm, you know, and starts filling things out, but it's 10-year-old information. And we can go and say, well, but based on what I found and some hires that they've made, I don't think that that's accurate, right? Or that's the only example I'll give. But it's good for both of you to be involved and then to really leverage your strategic partners for validation. Market size and health. All right, so this is kind of what you asked, Courtney. So where to look, right? I look at economic forecasts, I look at business journals, and sometimes I purchase data. I want to put a big exclamation point next to the purchase data. I'm sure you all have experienced this as well. You go and you buy a report, and it's just really unspecific for what we do. We're bunched in professional services, right? Or in construction, it's both residential and commercial construction. So I always say be very careful of purchase data, because it can be very, very expensive and it may not achieve what you need. Lead services, things like that do help and can provide more specific data, but it's really, what are you trying to get out of it? If you're trying to look at an overall market size, you probably don't need to get that granular. You can probably get it through forecasts, business journals, and other things Google pulls up. If you're really trying to see, okay, within the commercial market, what is build a suit versus tenant finish out? Well, that's where you're really going to need that lead data instead of even the purchase report. Online, of course, is where you get most of this information. Again, I would suggest any of your strategic partners validating some information. I mentioned that I was doing some research on Denver today, and something just wasn't passing my sniff test. So I called one of my colleagues in Colorado and asked them, you know, is this true? And they said, nope, your sniff test is absolutely right. That's not really what's happening here. And it was really helpful. Marketing, I think, is best suited to do this versus the principals and the BD folks, because we look at lots and lots of publications and information and try to read things for thought leadership and you name it. They're obviously very curious as well, but what I find is they're so laser focused on what they do that sometimes this broader they just don't have time for. Persona development and strategic. I put strategic partners as the second, because sometimes you're looking for strategic partners just like you're trying to identify those personas, and sometimes you're leveraging your strategic partners. So where to look for persona development? Of course, your previous, current, and aspirational clients, and your strategic partners when you're profiling them, because you might be profiling a strategic partner because you want to find more like them, right? Just like with the clients. And then LinkedIn is such a great tool for both client identification as well as persona development and finding strategic partners. I use LinkedIn in persona development by identifying actual people that are these personas and going and seeing what they share on LinkedIn, what they, you know, have they recommended people, really kind of stalking them on LinkedIn a little bit to validate our personas and really put some meat on it. Also, it answers the question about, is this a persona that's going to share our content, right? If we have a thought leadership program and we're trying to reach them, they may read it, of course, but are they also going to share it, right? So on that, the net promoter score type idea, you know, are they going to be high on it? Then the end client identification is similar, right? So economic forecasts, business journals, purchase data, strategic partners, and LinkedIn. We all know when you're on LinkedIn, in the bottom right-hand corner, when you're on a person, it suggests people like them. Sometimes it hits the nail on the head, sometimes it doesn't. And it's always helpful to take a look at those. It does the same thing with companies. So you can go to one of your clients, you know, and say, great, I want to see who it suggests that I go look at right over here, among other wonderful LinkedIn tools. And usually people are asking me to help them with end client identification when they're obviously wanting a new market sector, new service, geographical growth, or to grow within an existing market, and to take a look at their share of it. Finally, disruptors. I told you this is the one that's really fun for me. I have a really good time with this. Where to look? Well, honestly, Google is where to look, but Deloitte puts out some great reports, McKinsey, the different broker firms like CBRE, JLL, any of the niche ones as well. Sector organizations, just like SMPS and AIA and ULI put out reports, so do the sector organizations like the multifamily, it's an acronym and I never get it right, but it's not the Multifamily Housing Council, but it's like that. They put out research nationally, and so it's really great to go and check them out. Sometimes they partner with McKinsey or with Deloitte on a report, and you can really hear about what they're talking about as disruptors. Or you read about something and you go, oh, that's a disruptor for our potential service. And obviously that'll help with new market sector growth, new services, I mean, with just overall strategy and planning in your firm. So those are really kind of the different, I guess, ways that I slice and dice stuff. Whitney, you mentioned funding sources, federal, state. So since those are public entities, understanding, of course, where the funding comes from, if it is state or if it's federal or if it's federal through state, is the first step to understand basically the flow of that. So like I'll use aviation as an example. So aviation is funded federally and the states get the money to do the projects, similar to the highway construction, right? And so sometimes you need to go read the federal budget report, and sometimes you need to find the state report and reconcile them. It can be very confusing. And so I do a lot of digging to go find those things whenever I'm asked for those kinds of sectors. Higher education, right, is another one where capital improvement plans are usually published. And sometimes there's a mix of donor and state money there, right? And the Board of Regents meeting minutes are really, really helpful as well to find out what's getting approved for the next quarter and what's not getting approved. So those are where I really go as direct as possible to the source to understand what has been funded or what could potentially be funded, what's being asked for, and what their procurement process also looks like. So I hope I answered your question, or maybe I was too broad. Let me know if I was too broad, Whitney.
That's good. I have a follow-up question, but it may be something that you're covering later in the presentation. So I'll hold it.
Honestly, now I was just saying, for those of you that said that you feel like market research is your kryptonite, this is your sign that you can do it. And so ask me any questions. You've got me, so ask me any questions and I'll help demystify it as much as I can.
So
go for it.
Is we're going through a strategic planning process right now, and I looked at the agenda for a meeting Friday, and actually market research is going to be something that I'm going to take a bigger role in starting in the next few months. So my question is, I do all this research and it's going to be an ongoing process. So what are the ways you recommend presenting your research and like maintaining that database? We have vision, so I don't know if maybe it's just putting it into that platform, but I guess any suggestions you have on that?
Sure. So, I would step back and I always ask, so what's the purpose of our research? Is the research to stay ahead of potential projects? Is it for thought leadership ideas? What is, if you don't mind us picking on you, what is the purpose you think that they're looking for the market research?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I specifically mentioned the funding just because like right now we do a lot of, we obtain a lot of funding for our clients. And then of course, later on go on to design those projects. But we want to become better at that. So for me, it's going to be, staying abreast of, federal, state dollars coming in. Also too, we are a firm of 36 that we're hoping to double in size in the next few years. So I'm going to be looking at different service areas as well as probably geographic areas.
Okay.
So, and of course,
the
thought leadership too. So
sure.
A little bit of everything.
Oh, yeah, of course. There's always a primary. I guess I should have said the primary. All right. So right now, to be really responsive to your clients, you want to pay attention to what federal programs are out there and what dollars are out there for their projects, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we all know the federal government cycle, right? And budgets and all those kinds of things. And that's one of the nice things about doing anything public related. Typically speaking, Any organization, they vote on their initiatives for the next year and what money is going to be available in August. At any kind of board meeting, sometimes it's July. They usually draft something in April or May. And so that's when April and May is usually when I start going and hitting up sites to see what they're talking about. And if they've drafted something for whatever the governing body is that's relevant to that particular program, right? I go and I take a look and see if they've published anything, you know, a draft for consideration, or maybe they mention high-level initiatives. And then in August, I go and I see what's actually been put on the docket in the packet, right, for their meetings. And then they usually will, you know, sometimes they don't publish all of the documents until after the meeting's over. But I mean, if it's really important, I will you know how there's the video streams, I will watch it if it's that important and timely. So I don't know if that helps, but that's usually the cycle that I've seen. And so then you know what programs and what dollars are going to potentially be available around May for the following fiscal year, right? Starting in September, so you can get ahead of it.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any tips or tricks that they found when it comes to federal stuff for government? That same cycle applies, by the way, to higher ed, both public and private. That's usually their rhythm. Does anybody else have any either research that it's been on their minds that they'd like to conduct, or maybe you're in the middle of doing some and feel stuck or looking for some different resources? I'm going to take that as a no. Are there any, you know, you mentioned, Whitney, any kind of tools to keep things up to date relative to, you know, when you find that information? I think it, of course, depends on what you're trying to find. But if there are particular programs for funding projects and things like that, it's not sexy. I actually use a spreadsheet to do that, because I can link to other documents more easily, you know. So as an example, I remember one firm, I had a Word document. Again, this is not super sexy, and there's probably other ways to do it, like with SharePoint and all sorts of things. But particularly for those individuals that would come into the firm that were newer, and they were seller doers and doing some business development, where they didn't necessarily know about all of the programs that we were tapping into for public K-12 for our clients. So I would have a summary of what that actual program, you know, is, with web links and things like that in a Word document. And my Excel document, you know, the name of the program was actually hyperlinked to that document. So if they needed a description that, you know, was clunky in an Excel field, they had more information. And then, you know, usually kind of who it's for. Is it for a public K-12? Is it for an MEP project, an architecture project? Anyway, that kind of stuff, and the fields that were relevant. And, you know, just I kept that up to date. As it related to pursuing specific projects with clients, that was where, of course, the CRM jumped in. But usually when I was trying to, it's kind of like a word program, you know, when you're submitting for awards or speaking. I never found a good way to do that through one of our other systems. I usually just kept it in Excel, but somebody else has a good trick please share.
That's good to know because I am starting that process next week. So I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it really similarly to just keeping track of award submissions and, you know, submitting to conferences to speak and things like that. And usually, again, depending on what it's for, if it's for federal funding and stuff like that, you might be able to hunker down and August, beginning of September, and get most of it up to date just in those 2 days for the year. But as we all know, when it comes to like thought leadership and conferences and things like that, they announce when the conference is going to be, you know, at the conference usually. So you got to, it's a constant. That one's a constant. So with the capital, it's kind of like when you're looking at capital improvement plans and things like that, you can identify them and then you just watch the board minutes for when they get released.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Thanks for having some questions. Happy to help. Well, if you all don't have any other questions, then I guess we're all finished for today. I'm happy to answer any questions offline if people don't want to be vulnerable and ask now.
Well, the only question that I guess had from like a marketer's perspective, what is in your opinion, if you are a marketing coordinator or marketing manager, what is the most useful market research that we have the skills and the ability to do without paying for anything that that we could bring leadership to be the most valuable? Like what shows us to be a valuable resource that we could bring to the table?
I would say, depending on your discipline, there are disruptors that we all need to be watching for. And it's good for them to see you thinking that way, but they will value potential projects more. And so what I mean by that is perhaps helping them to identify some clients maybe that they're not working with that they should consider working with. You know, I noticed that we've been doing a lot of multifamily projects lately. Did you know that so-and-so is headquartered here and, you know, one of our engineering partners that we work with does a lot of work with them. Would you be interested? So kind of doing that where you're not bringing a specific project, but you're bringing the idea of another project in a way that seems fairly easy because they already do a lot of business development with that engineer. And so picking up the phone and saying, hey, I see that you do business with so-and-so. Would you mind an introduction? We'd be really interested in getting to know them. In my experience, whenever I can bring a potential opportunity to the table, it's highly valued because there is a potential future revenue value to that.
Thank you. I think that that's great feedback. Sometimes I think that in the world that you and I live in of market research or data analytics or anything like that, sometimes we blow it up to make it scarier or bigger than it needs to be. So I love that you kind of blew the myth a little bit, which was great, so that we could feel like it's doable at either level, and it also doesn't cost $1 million to try to take on a research project.
No, it doesn't.
Have well, like a PhD to do it.
No, not at all. And usually you have, again, those strategic partners, those allies, whether it's a marketing coordinator, you know, I don't know why I keep picking on an engineering firm, but, you know, you get something in your head. But, you know, maybe it's another marketing coordinator at an engineering firm, and you call them and say, hey, can I take you to coffee? I'd love to pick your brain because I'd like to present to my leadership some ideas for growth. And we do a lot of similar project types. So can I pick your brain? And they may say, oh gosh, I don't know anything. You go, well, yeah, you do. You put together a lot of proposals. You know exactly who you're putting them together for, you know? And that's really helpful. So sometimes just picking up the phone and going to coffee is all you got to do.
Yeah, I definitely want to put a plug in for SMPS if anybody isn't a member or hasn't checked it out. Like, that's an amazing resource to meet other fellow marketers so that you can form those relationships, especially if you are doing a bunch of proposals, or especially teaming proposals, because the people that are requesting resumes from you are the ones that you can build relationships with. And if you do have those teaming situations, it's a perfect opportunity to just also say, hey, I just wanted to follow up and make sure that you got the resumes. Also, by the way, you know, what are you guys seeing in the market? Those kind of things.
Yep. Like I mentioned, that's exactly what I did relative to Denver today. So I called up one of those partners and just said, hey, can you tell me, you know, that I'm not crazy here? Because I'm reading this and the data's not validating what they're saying. And it was really helpful. We had a really good and robust conversation to the point where, I mean, he was rattling off, you know, potential target companies and all of that. Is amazing. Like, well, thank you. I wasn't going that deep, but thank you. And so those partners can be really helpful.
And if you are new and starting out and you're a coordinator going, well, I don't have any allies, and, you know, Sarah, Courtney, you've been around for a while. I won't date us too long, but, you know, we've been around for a while, so we do have some of those relationships built up. I think that even if you are starting out and you are a member of a organization or society, looking in those directories, that gives you an automatic in. So I know I have people that contact me that I have never met, and all they say is, as an introduction, is, hey, we're members of the same organization and I wanted to talk to you about blah, blah, blah. Do you have time? Sure, absolutely. Let's talk. So definitely leverage what you are already involved in or have already committed to. Don't ever think like, oh, I have to be here for 20 years to be able to do this. No, that's not true.
People like to, I mean, the reality, right? The reason why we can get interviews with clients and things like that, they like to feel like they have something to share. People like that.
Agreed. Does anybody else have any sort of final thoughts or things that you wanted to share while you have this amazing resource at your fingertips to ask Sarah questions? All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for putting your information up there, Sarah.
Absolutely.
We will send out a follow-up email tomorrow or the next day, having a survey so that you can provide feedback for this call. Also provide future topics that you want to hear presenters speak on, or for you to kind of have a forum or discussion around. Please reach out to Sarah. We will also include a link to a recap of this. Share it with other marketers that you know, or others in your firm. And definitely reach out to Sarah with all of your market research needs. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day and fantastic week. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Thank you.